Hi, friends, and welcome back to the podcast. So this is our sixth and final chapter of our series on admission nutrients, qualities that can make for a healthier, more meaningful college admission process and life. In case you missed it, we started with collaboration with Raissa Diamante, Director of Admission from Harvey-Mudd. And then I sat down with Deanna Dixon, the Dean of Admission at Smith College, to talk about leadership. And then Tom met with Dysean Alexander from Lafayette College to talk about consistent engagement, and Nathan Faust from Loyola Marymount University to talk about service to others. Today we conclude the series talking with Hillary Dickman from Colorado College about intellectual curiosity. Hillary and I met at the national conference a couple of years ago, and she came up to me and let me know that she uses some of CEG's brainstorming exercises when she's leading students through essay workshops as an admission officer. And I've had different admission officers come up to me and say this, but it's the highest form of compliment. And side note to college admission officers who are tuning in, we've got editable slides and handouts that you can use with students when giving presentations on essays. We won't be covering those today, but they've been used by colleges all over the country. You can find a link to them at collegeessayguide.com/colleges. In our conversation today, Hillary and I cover a lot of ground. We talk about what intellectual curiosity is in the context of the college admission process, where, practically speaking, intellectual curiosity shows up in a student's application or where it can, why it's important in the admission process at Colorado College in particular, and how their approach to identifying intellectual curiosity differs from other liberal arts colleges. We break down Colorado College's supplemental essay prompt, which, if you're listening to this right after it's released, it just came out like a few days ago. She gives advice to students on their personal statement, in particular, how to get started. And then she offers some great wisdom for both students and parents as they navigate this process. If you've never met Hillary before, she's originally from the San Francisco Bay Area and holds a bachelor's and a master's in speech communication from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. She started her career in higher ed teaching public speaking, interpersonal communication, and intercultural communication at the University of Cincinnati and the University of Colorado at Colorado Springs. Since 2021, she's been part of the admission team at Colorado College, where she's worked on scholarship programs, the Counselor Advisory Board, and now focuses on print and email marketing. She's also navigated the college admission process as a parent. Her older child is a recent graduate of Wellesley, and her younger one is a student at Colorado College. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I certainly did. Well, hi, Hillary. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ethan. Thank you so much for having me.
So it's summertime, and a thing that students might be wondering about as they listen to this, or parents, is what do college admission counselors do during the summer? So what are you up to so far this summer? What's your... Yeah.
It's funny. People ask me lots of times if I get the summer off, and I'm like, oh, no, I don't get the summer off. This is like our time to catch up. And it is a little bit slower. Like I'm trying to take a day off every other week or so to use up my PTO that I can't use the rest of the year. But we have a lot of, so I work in admission communications and marketing, and there are a lot of projects that we sort of save for the summer, or, you know, rewriting email campaigns, creating new print publications, that kind of thing, that those have to be ready to go in August or September. And so we start working on them in April or May and spend most of our summer doing that work. We also go to conferences. I just got back from Slate Summit. Some of our outreach and access folks just got back from the GWI, Guiding the Way to Impact conference, and College Horizons. So we're off doing some professional development and connecting with students in different ways. I also do a little bit of travel, recruitment travel to some summer fairs. So it's a lot of like working on things that we don't have time to work on the rest of the year. And I try to make space to be creative because my work sort of requires me to have long periods of time when I can just dive deeply into thinking kind of big picture and thinking creatively. So I try to save space for that in the summer also.
Neat. Well, one of the exercises that I love is our rules and identities exercise, which we're, which I use pretty regularly now. And I'd be curious, I shared it with you ahead of time, but I'd be curious just by way of contexting some of the roles that you play in the admission office at Colorado College. What are some of those invisible hats that you wear?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I love the roles and identities activity. I've done it with students during essay workshops. So it's a fun one to get to use on yourself, right? After working with students on it. So I have been in this office longer than most of my colleagues. I have the fourth longest tenure in my office. And yet I came to admission late. I came from the classroom side of higher ed, and then I worked in nonprofits for a little while before I moved into admission. And so I'm older than a lot of my colleagues, but also have sort of a different perspective on admission than they do because they have a longer history here. So I see myself as a challenger in some ways because I'm thinking a little bit differently, both maybe from a parent role and also because this is new to me. And I sort of, have you heard the old story about like, we're all gathered around the kitchen together making the Christmas roast, and we cut the ends off of the roast because that's what Grandma always did, but nobody knows why we cut the ends off the roast. And so somebody asks Grandma, why do we cut the ends off the roast? And she says, well, because we didn't used to have a pan that was big enough for the whole roast.
Right.
And so it's that like thinking about why are we doing the things that we're doing? Is it just because we've always done it that way? And what does this new sort of market in higher ed demand, and how can we meet it differently? So I like to challenge a little bit kind of on that front. And then also because all this seems to come back to my age because I'm a little bit older than some of my colleagues. I also sort of take on the nurturing role. I feel like I am pretty intentional about identifying strengths in my younger colleagues and affirming them in the work that they're doing. I feel like it's a real privilege for me to not necessarily see this as a step on a career ladder because I came to this later. Like I'm not trying to be a VP of enrollment. I'm not trying to be a dean of admission. I just really like the work that I do, and I like being able to support the younger folks around me who are going to be deans of admission someday, and to be able to say, wow, I see that you do this thing really well. That's an incredible strength. Have you thought about? And then kind of poking them on opportunities that are coming up in the office. So that nurturing role is, I think, pretty fun. And then I also, in addition to my marketing and comms work, I get to be a territory rep. So I've got the western slope of Colorado and I have most of New England. And I am, perhaps to a fault, protective of my territories. So the advocate and protector roles are my colleagues would probably say those are the ones that are most obvious to them. I think, especially when I think about western slope of Colorado students, that's a really rural part of the world. Those kids who live down in the Four Corners area or even up like near Telluride, Montrose, those places are very, very far from urban areas. And those students have something incredible to offer to the college that we don't see from students coming from urban areas. And so I'm a really strong advocate for them. And I want to make sure we do team-based evaluations here, but I want to make sure that my eyes get on every file of every student from my territory, which can be challenging with our volume. But I want to make sure that I'm available to advocate for those students.
Mm-hmm. I'd love for you to spend just a minute before we get into sort of the theme of today and just maybe give us a little bit of background for folks who aren't familiar with Colorado College in terms of, how many students attend, how many students apply, these kinds of things.
Yeah. We are selective or highly selective, depending on how you define it, national small liberal arts college. So we get around high 8,000, low 9,000 applications every year. Our incoming class this year is 517 students. The college altogether is around 2,100 or 2,200 students, depending on the year. And we're a small liberal arts college. We're the only selective or highly selective small liberal arts college in the Rocky Mountain region. Our peer institutions are schools like the Claremont colleges and Bowdoin, Bates, Colby. We have a lot of overlap with Middlebury, Whitman, those types of small liberal arts colleges kind of across the country that attract really curious students, a lot of students who are interested in adventure inside and outside of the classroom. That's a big part of life here in the Rocky Mountains, but also because of the way we do our classes. The thing that CC is most known for is the block plan. So our students take one class at a time. Each class lasts for 3.5 weeks. And having no scheduling conflicts for the students and professor allows the faculty member to take students off campus to do field study for lots of our classes, or to really just dive deeply and focus on the topic that they're learning about. So it's a different way of learning that requires and really works well for a different type of student.
Mm-hmm. And for those who missed it, who are driving or brushing their teeth or doing whatever you listen when you listen to podcasts, you're taking one class at a time at Colorado College. So I want to let that sink in for students and parents listening for a second about what that might mean, what that might look like. So we're going to get into that a little bit more as we get later into the questions. But I'd love for us to just zoom back for a minute and talk about this quality of intellectual curiosity, which, after surveying hundreds of college and university websites over the last couple of years, this is the one that's come up the most frequently, different variations on it. What are you a nerd for? What are you a geek for? These kinds of things. But it's come up again and again. And I'd be curious, from your perspective, what intellectual curiosity means in the context of the college admission process. I mean, is this more about depth? Is it about breadth? Or is it more about like a certain attitude toward learning?
Yeah, I think that there are elements of all of those that we look for. And we're building a community, right? We're not looking for just one type of student. We're looking for lots of different kinds of students who complement each other in a myriad of ways. So yes, we're looking for depth. We love it when we find a student who finds one thing that they care really deeply about and they're really excited about, and they just go on that one thing. I remember reading an application from a student from Boulder, Colorado, and she had turned her little walk-in closet in her bedroom into a lab, and she was growing algae in her bedroom to test the photoreceptors of different kinds of algae, because photoreceptors I don't know anything about microbiology, but I learned from her that apparently photoreceptors are important to creating biofuel. And
side note, I love that moment when I'm reading a student's essay or application where I learn something from them. And I tell students, I'm like, if you're a nerd for something, you might actually be teaching the reader something. So here's an example. Great.
Yeah, let the nerd flag fly, because it's fascinating to read these applications where there are students who are diving into something because their curiosity about that one topic is limitless. Mm-hmm. So we love those kinds of students. We also love the students who have a lot of breadth to their curiosity. So they might be curious about a lot of different things. And I would consider these students to be the perfect liberal arts learners, because in the liberal arts, we're encouraging students to learn about a lot of different topics and understand the context of their favorite topic among all these other sort of subjects that are available to them to study. So an example I thought of for this, actually, this is my younger daughter. So she loves ancient languages. She took Latin and ancient Greek when she was in middle school and high school. Wow. And when I know, right? I love a classical curriculum, and man, she does too. And when we were exploring colleges, we were at Swarthmore. Famously, Swarthmore is an arboretum campus. And so their trees have all of these Latin names on them, right? Which she had not really thought about naming conventions for plants, or why plants had Latin names, or how those Latin names were created. And that led her to doing a deep dive into plant naming conventions, which led her to learning more about plants. And then she was curious about plants. And you should see how many plants this child now has, right, in her bedroom and her dorm room. And then that made her more interested in sustainability, and specifically sustainability in farming. And this kid took a gap year. She went to Italy because she also loves art, and spent a year studying art and learning Italian. And what do you think an 18-year-old does while they're in Italy learning about art and Italian? They also drink wine. And so she started drinking wine. And so she's learning Italian, she's drinking wine, and she cares about sustainability. And all of this is overlapping with these other interests that she had that really started with her love for ancient languages, right? Mm-hmm. And this summer, right now, as we speak, she has an internship at a winery in Italy where she's learning about sustainability and winemaking. And like that kind of curiosity that starts as one thing and then transforms over time into something different. And I can't tell you where it's going to go from here. She hasn't decided her major yet. She's still exploring. Like, that is what we want from a liberal arts learner who is excited about learning about all these different facets of multiple topics.
I love this. I sometimes call this quality curiosity with legs.
Yeah.
And certainly it means like curiosity and then doing stuff about it, which it sounds like your daughter did. And then the legs for wine connoisseurs will have a double meaning.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So that sort of breadth is something that we really value. And then we value students' attitudes toward learning. I have a quote on my wall from Adam Grant. He's one of my favorites. And he says, the people with the most potential are the ones who know that they have a lot to learn. And so that sort of humility, that desire to learn, the realization that like there is a lot out there and you don't know it all yet, that feeling of wonder or awe at how big the world is and how much there is to learn and wanting to dig in wherever you encounter something new, that is something that we value. We try to create a culture in our office of not being afraid to ask questions, because how can you learn if you don't ask questions? And I think the idea that students come to us knowing that they don't know it all is really important and shows a fundamental kind of curiosity.
Yeah, I love this so much. I think it's really wise what you're pointing to, this notion of students who aren't necessarily pointing to what they know, because sometimes there's that temptation, right, to be like proving of the self and look at the things that I've done. But I love it when a student is pointing in their essays, for instance, to like big questions that they're excited to explore. And that's what I wish for students in this process and in college, is to be like finding new questions. And in fact, one of the things that I heard, I forget who said this, but like the mark of are you happy and engaged in your work is, are you working on interesting questions? So I think,
and you know what's so interesting is like those questions might not be interesting to everyone, but they're interesting to you. And if you can dig in and you can talk endlessly about them and ask additional questions, like there are definitely things that I read about in my students' applications that I'm like, well, that is not a topic for me, but I'm really glad you're exploring it, right? Like algae,
Totally.
like I don't have the capacity to think in a way that would lead me to building a lab in my closet so that I can explore algae. But man, like that is interesting to her. And so she's really going for it.
Yeah. You're already giving some beautiful examples, and I want to just say to students who are listening, who are trying to think about how to stand out, quote unquote, in the college application process. One of the things I want to encourage you to consider as you're listening to this, like what are those big questions that you're interested in exploring? Is there somewhere where you maybe weave them into the application? Because it can be a really cool way of showing your curiosity. So besides that, what are some of the other places, Hillary, like practically speaking, that intellectual curiosity might show up in a student's application?
Yeah, it's so funny. I was listening to this series that you're doing, and in the first one, you kind of alluded to some places where this might show up, and you were spot on, I thought. The transcript, yes, for sure. When a student gets to choose their classes, what classes are they choosing and why? And sometimes they're the most rigorous classes, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're classes where a student has said, like, gosh, I have to choose here because, like, AP Bio and this class on the environmental systems of the Maine coast are at the same time. And like in an admission review, the AP Bio class might be the one that is considered more rigorous. But if this student is really fascinated by coastal Maine and the systems that exist there in the environment, and that student chooses that, and it's obvious that it's something that the student is fascinated by, and they want opportunities to dig into marine biology, well, then it makes sense for the student to choose that class. You know, you'd hope they'd be able to take both. But those, I don't think that a class, just because it's the most rigorous, necessarily shows that the student is, you know, has the most intellectual curiosity. So seeing what's available at their school and then seeing what they choose to take, depending on kinds of what choices they have. If there are classes that are available outside of their school that they want to jump into, or opportunities to learn over the summer, those are really great opportunities. Online classes, those kinds of things that don't show up on the transcript, but are academic ways to pursue their curiosity, those are all great. So we see some of that on the transcript, and then some of those are separate from the transcript, but I would file under academics. And then activities, we see for sure intellectual curiosity showing up in students' activities. So how are students using their time? What kinds of opportunities are they seeking in order to learn new things? And I think that sometimes we'll see students who have activities on their list that seem a little bit outside of their academic wheelhouse, and that's fine too. Like I know that there are schools where filmmaking classes aren't available, but maybe a student is really curious about filmmaking and what goes into it and how you create a film from start to finish. And so you see that show up as a summer project or a summer class or a summer program or something that they pursue independently. And that tells me that, wow, this student has gone beyond what's actually easily available to them in their school and is trying to learn outside of school. So that's for sure meaningful to us. And then letters of recommendation. Are students asking questions in class? And what kinds of questions are they asking? Our classes here at CC, because of the block plan, are 3 hours long and they're discussion-based. And if you don't come with some questions, if nobody in class comes with some questions to ask, it's going to be a very boring class. And you're asking a lot of an instructor, right, to pull new information or create new discussions out of thin air. So we really value students who are not dominating conversations, but are asking questions in class. And are they learning for learning's sake? And how does the letter point to that? Is this the kind of student who comes to a teacher after class and has their essay in hand and doesn't ask about the grade? Why did I get 42 points out of 50? But says, hey, I'm really curious about your comments here on page 3 of my essay. Can you help me understand what you meant by this? I really want to get this. That's a very different student from a student who's learning from a grade. And that for sure stands out to us. And then the essay, does their essay show that the student wanted to know more about something? And it doesn't need to be an academic area necessarily, right? But does it show awe? Does it show wonder? Does it show a desire to learn? And I'm saying show purposely, right? Because it's not that I want them to tell me and recount how they wanted to learn something and so they went and did this thing, but tell me the story of how you learned new things and why that mattered to you.
Yeah, I love this. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about the supplemental essay, which right when this releases, it will have come out I think 4 days before. So Stay tuned for that, y'all listeners. But I'd love to just hear, Hillary, maybe some examples of these so that when students are thinking about, our parents are saying, hey, you need to show that you're curious. What are some awesome examples that you've seen over the years?
Yeah. Last year, I was working with a student from Durango, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go to his high school and sit with the students there and read their essays and give them feedback. And he brought me his essay, and it was perfect from the first time that I read it. And it was a montage structure. And part of the montage was about how he spends the summer in Alaska working on a seaweed farm. And his family is from Alaska. And so he goes up there, and you could see his awe and his wonder coming through in talking about the landscape and talking about standing, up to his knees in water and dragging his hands through the seaweed and wondering, how does this grow here? And why does this work? And why is this farm set up the way that it is? And it was just clear that he had a really strong desire to understand the environment that he was working in and that he was wanting to learn every day. So that's one example that stood out to me. I remember reading another student who was from the Boston area who would spend one afternoon a week just sitting in his local town square playing chess with the unhoused folks who hung out in the local town square. And he wasn't doing it because he wanted to get better at chess, although that is a different kind of intellectual curiosity, right? That sort of game theory and figuring out how to perfect your chess game. He was doing it because he was interested in the people he was playing with and because he wanted to know their stories. Yeah. How did you end up here? What's the rest of your story? We see you out here in the park and we know that you're unhoused, but there's more to you than that. Tell me more about who you are. And it's really easy as a liberal arts person to see that carrying over into studying psychology or sociology or political science or something that helps you change those systems, because the people are worth it, right? So that was a pretty fascinating one. So before I started working in admission, I was sort of walking alongside my older daughter through this process. And I really loved her essay. I still love her essay, where she weaves together part of her own story with Atalanta, who was this character in Greek mythology. And toward the end of it, she says, a few summers ago, my mom and I backpacked in Yosemite National Park, and I finally witnessed its grandeur. Looking up at the countless stars, I thought about how thousands of years ago, this was the sky that Greeks gazed upon. No wonder there are so many stories of heroes and gods, monsters and kings. There's hardly another way to explain the limitless grandeur a person sees looking up at something so vast. And I go back and look at that now, and it's really easy for me on the other side of it now as an admission rep to be able to look at that and see, like, look at the wonder in that, and look at how she's looking at the sky, and it's making her think about an ancient civilization. And since then, I've read essays from other students who are talking about the sky, and they're talking about it from physics, right? From a physics perspective or an astronomy perspective, and the desire to understand how the sky was made and how stars came to be and what's out there that they can't see. But that, like, really, like, asking those big questions that are a little bit philosophical in nature but tie to so many other areas of study, I think are really interesting and fun to see. And then, Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, like, hearing that, sorry, I know you've got...
No, sorry, I'm like on a monologue, Ethan.
You're great. You're doing great. I'm interrupting, basically. It just makes me think that, like, I want to add to this intellectual curiosity, to, like, our understanding of it. I want to, like, just say back what I'm hearing you say. It's like there's this sense of wonder and awe. And I think that's a beautiful way also of, like, expanding our definition here, or if we're creating a word cloud of something that in the middle we're calling intellectual curiosity, there are all these other words that we can use to describe it. And I just think that's such a beautiful example. And I'm adding wonder and awe to my own conception of this, sort of nebulous thing that we're talking about.
I love that. I think that, and maybe it's because I'm coming from the Colorado College perspective where, like, our students are asked to dig into one thing for 3.5 weeks. You have to have some wonder, right? In order to maintain that pace and that depth of learning, you've got to be excited about learning new things. And that comes from a place of, wow, like, I didn't know that could exist, or I didn't know that could be, or I didn't know that people could do that, or, I think it's a big world and there's a lot to learn.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, what was the thing?
So then I just wanted to give an example from one of my favorite teacher recs of all time. This was a few cycles ago. And this was a student I really wanted to come to CC after I read this rec. And he didn't. He ended up at the place that's perfect for him. But his teacher, it's so funny. This student, like, had a little bit of trouble getting their homework done, but also was clearly just loved learning. So this teacher says he did a good 90% of the homework I assigned, which I love. In class, he was attentive, curious, teachable, funny, and always on task. Whatever you teach him, he'll drink it up and ask questions that come from a mind with a high interest in understanding and a low threshold for wonder. Wow. He's frequently very excited by learning. The other day, he was in my room talking about classes, and as happens when he gets excited, his limbs stiffened slightly, all that energy with nowhere to go. And he said most emphatically, "Mr. H, I love calculus."
So good.
Isn't it so good? I mean,
so good.
First of all, like, the tone of this letter was so fantastic because it was so authentic. Like, you could tell that the teacher just sat down. Like, I think the first line was, "I've been so excited to write this recommendation for the last 2 years." And so he had some pent-up energy also, that he was just waiting for an opportunity to tell us about the student. And you could feel it. I mean, it was electric. As soon as I finished reading it, I immediately, like, copied and pasted his email address and sent him a thank you note, because he just made it so clear why we should want to have this student at our school. And it wasn't because he had achieved some great thing. it was because he was curious and he wanted to learn. And those are the kinds of students we want, right? Because we know that that curiosity is going to lead to big things. We care a lot about making a positive impact on the world here at CC and in lots of other small liberal arts colleges. And these students who have really good hearts and who want to know more are the kinds of students who are going to make change in the world.
I love this so much. I mean, for a few different reasons. One is just like I'm just captured by the energy. I'm moved by the time that the teacher took to advocate for this student. And as, someone on the college essay side, I go, wow. And it seems like what that, recommender wrote, like made a difference.
Oh my gosh, made a huge difference.
Yeah. It sounds like, I mean, I'm not going to ask you to be like, did it help him get in or not? But it seems like it puts something on your radar in a bigger way. And this student was just, this was a quality that they'd had. They weren't like doing this thing. They weren't screaming, Mr. H, I love calculus because they were trying to get into Colorado College.
Right.
They were just being their awesome selves.
Yes.
In the world. And this teacher, was a witness at this moment and was able to choose that.
Yeah. And I just don't think there are that many kids who love calculus enough to yell, I love calculus, or say emphatically, I love calculus. But I think the other part that's hard is that there aren't that many students who are willing to wear their hearts on their sleeves in that way, right? And so it takes a certain kind of student to be willing to like let their nerd flag fly and to be unapologetically themselves. We aren't all like that. And some of us show our intellectual curiosity in quieter ways. For this student, it was obvious, right? But for another student, it might be that they show up quietly after class and say, hey, your comments on my essay made me think about this other thing. Like, what would you think about for my next essay if I delved into that? So there are lots of different ways to show your intellectual curiosity. This student happened to be one of those who it's hard not to notice how curious they are and how much they love to learn. And for others, it's going to be a quieter kind of experience.
Yeah. And I love that this is something that for students who are younger or parents who have younger students, like this is something that they can be doing all along, like throughout high school. This isn't like a wait till your college applications to start being intellectually curious. And I'm probably preaching to the choir if they're listening to this episode, or they're listening to this. There are so many ways to nurture that and to bring that forward. And I just want to encourage any students, listening to this, that there are so many different ways to show that. And I think it's easy to get it wrong when we start to add the pressure of what colleges want, quote unquote. So I wonder if you could say just a few words about what do you feel students misunderstand or parents misunderstand about what intellectual curiosity means in the context of the college application or admission process?
Yeah, that's such a great question because I think there's so much pressure to like deconstruct the college admission process or turn it into a formula. And it's not a formula, and it's frustrating to hear show up as your authentic self, but that's really what we want. So I think that there's pressure on students to feel like they have to make or create some kind of project. That you hear like the passion project phrase thrown around, which makes my heart hurt for students. But I think that pressure to like go the extra mile, do something extra, to build a lab in your closet, right? Like that's not for every student, and it's not the only way to show that you're curious. I think the idea of the word passion at all at age 17 is really tough. It's 0.1% of 17-year-olds who have figured out that there's something that they're really, truly passionate about and it's going to be a lifelong pursuit for them. So I don't think that is equivalent with intellectual curiosity. I think for students who believe that they have to take all of the most rigorous classes at their school, I think that's a rough path to go down. I think it's really hard to dig into what you're curious about if all of your time is taken up studying for really tough exams or writing really hard papers. There's just not enough room to let your mind wander. And part of being intellectually curious is having time for your mind to wander and to daydream a little bit and just to think in a quiet space, right? And then I think that this like pressure from students, especially in STEM, to be doing university level research or publishing with a university level faculty member. That I know that there are colleges where that would stand out and that would be important. But if that is the only way that you're showing your intellectual curiosity, you're missing a lot. And I just think it's unrealistic and it's a crazy thing for students to be reaching for. And there are going to be some who are going to do that, and that's awesome. And most of us shouldn't be aiming for that, because if you're a 17-year-old and you have a 17-year-old brain, you should be exploring lots of different things and thinking more widely and not spending all of your time in a lab. That's not to say that I don't value that. I certainly do. We have this awesome program on the Western Slope that matches students with faculty members doing research all over the country. And I love it when those students get to go spend a summer doing that. It's amazing. It gets them off the Western Slope of Colorado, out of rural Colorado. They get to go experience something different. But it's one component of what they're doing, and it's not the thing that makes them stand out.
I love this point that you're making about there not being a formula. I'm so with you, of course. And I even, in creating this podcast series and putting out the notion of these nutrients, felt self-conscious and felt like, oh gosh, this is going to be one more thing that turns this even more into an arms race. So I just want to re-emphasize for students or parents who are maybe only listening, especially, and counselors maybe who are, that this is kind of a side note, but I want to say it in front of you, Hillary. This is not meant to be like, okay, new boxes to check and you have to do these things in order to get into a great college. These just happen to be things that when I talk to admission officers like you, they're like, yeah, these are things that we look for, and trying to decode what some of these things are, because I think students are sometimes confused. And yet, so I imagine a parent, a student listening to this, and I hear on the one hand you say, well, you don't have to have created a lab in your walk-in closet. And yet they listen to podcasts and they listen to examples. And these are the cool, flashy examples that we use when we talk about things that stuck out to us. So I can see why students have that pressure or feel that pressure. But then I think the question that comes up is, well, for selective colleges and universities, what's a quote unquote average kid to do, right? Like a student who doesn't have the sort of proof that they've been intellectually curious. They've read some books, they read what was required in class, and they've spent some time on their own, and maybe they, played some video games, and they play soccer, and they're maybe even co-captain of their soccer team. And yet they've seen students in the last couple of years who have all of the things seemingly getting rejected from these schools that they're thinking, oh, wait, I should have a great shot, or I would probably do great there. So I think I'm coming around to asking, what advice do you give to students who don't have the flashy examples?
Yeah, I think it's about looking at how you live your life and identifying what you're talking about as the nutrients, in this case specifically intellectual curiosity. Where does that come through? Because I think that most of our students can identify a place where it shows up in their life, but it might you might have to take a step back from your life, right? And look at it from like a 10,000 foot view and be able to see the different ways that you engage in your life and the examples of how your curiosity shows up. So I don't think it's so much about fitting into a formula or checking boxes as it is about seeing what is it that you're already doing that you can highlight for us. So there are only 2 quotes on my wall in here, I promise. And I already referred to one of them. But the other one is this one that says, I'm literally reading it off my wall right now, everyone is interesting once you get them talking. And I really, I love having that on my wall because it reminds me to take my time while I'm reading a student's application. And we shouldn't expect students to be able to put together a perfect application and be able to tie up all the loose ends, make all the connections. Some of that is our job, but you can make it easier as the student by being reflective, by being a critical thinker, by knowing yourself well, which is why I love your process, Ethan, because it encourages students to know themselves well so that they can pull out those examples of when they were curious and what they did with that curiosity.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to say thanks for saying that and emphasize for folks who maybe, again, this is like your first time listening to the podcast, that these things that we're talking about, these qualities, are qualities that I don't believe are just about getting into college. They're about leading a more meaningful, purposeful life. And side note, they might lead you to, interesting jobs, interesting work, interesting career. So I'd love to talk about CC, aka Colorado College in particular, just a little bit, and why intellectual curiosity is important in, my Southern is going to come out, in y'all's admission process.
Oh man, that word is sneaking into the vocabulary up here in Colorado. Yeah, it's important at CC for a couple of different reasons. One, because we're a liberal arts college, right? So the point of attending a liberal arts college is to get a really broad foundation to understand the context of your major in kind of the rest of the world, to become a really good critical thinker, to become agile once you get out, to be able to change careers if you need to or want to. And that's all about being able to learn. And at CC, it's about being able to learn quickly. So our classes here are 3 hours long. They go from 9 to noon every day. All of our students are in class at the same time. And they're all discussion-based classes. And if you can imagine being in a political science class or a philosophy class for 3 hours where you're discussing a text that you read the night before, it was maybe 150 pages of text, and it's hard text to get through, that can be a tough 3 hours if students aren't really engaged and aren't asking good questions and aren't thinking critically. One of our political science professors calls the third hour of class the magic hour. And he says, I taught at Dartmouth, I taught at Dickinson, and at both of those schools, my longest classes were like an hour and 15 minutes long. And students and parents and teachers all know that it's hard to get a class moving for the first 45 minutes, maybe longer of class, right? Like everyone kind of has to like drop their armor and be willing to engage. And that's why we do warm up activities in classes or in groups, right? When we're trying to get groups to bond, because we want people to be able to come to that discussion as their full and authentic selves. And so he says that once you get to the third hour of class, that's when everyone is comfortable and the discussion is rolling and you're getting the best of that discussion. But you got to get to the third hour of class, and there just aren't very many schools that have 3-hour classes. So our students really need to be able to stay curious for that full class period. And so intellectual curiosity at CC means kind of being able to go that extra mile and finish strong in class every day. And then our classes are interdisciplinary also. So like at all probably liberal arts colleges, there are going to be a lot of different topics that are covered in one subject area of a class. We care a lot about sustainability at CC, and 80% of our departments have classes that cover sustainability in one way or another. So that doesn't matter if you're in a philosophy class or an Asian studies class, you're going to encounter sustainability. Well, if sustainability isn't something that you really care about, you're going to have to find a way to engage with it. And that's easier to do if you're curious about the world and how the world works. So it's not just sustainability, right? Like the point of being at a liberal arts college and taking interdisciplinary classes is being exposed to lots of different ideas, and those should pique your curiosity. They should make you think differently. They should make you change your mind, and you should be open to changing your mind. But it's hard to be open to that if you're not curious about different perspectives and different ways of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fun to imagine studying the same thing for 6-8 hours a day, 3.5 weeks, like really intensively. And it sounds to me like a really beautiful example of sort of like, of just the liberal arts ethos, the experience of like, let's get in on this and then, all right, now let's move to something else. I'm curious, when it comes to, CC's approach to identifying intellectual curiosity, how is that different from, say, other liberal arts colleges?
Yeah. It's interesting. I obviously haven't worked at other liberal arts colleges. I have chatted with folks in our office who have worked in other liberal arts environments and who have a better understanding of the review process in other places or what they look for. And I have come to believe that a lot of the way that we do things in our office at CC is shaped by our director of admission, Matt Bonzer, who graduated from CC in 98, and he's been here ever since. And there's something wonderful about just his personality, and his approach to life, which is very nuanced. His two favorite sayings are, "I don't see bright lines," and "my favorite color is gray," which I think just speaks to the nuance with which he kind of sees the world and which he approaches admission. And so one way that I think our approach to the admission process is a little bit different at CC is that we don't have a lot of things that are like, you have to have done this thing or you have to be this way in order to be admitted to CC. So one example of that is that we're looking for rigorous classes across 3 out of 5 academic subject areas. And we're not picky about which 3 we see them in. You don't have to have rigor across 3 different subject areas to be admitted. This is sort of like the peak, right, of what we're looking for. But it's not like you don't have to have gotten to the highest level of math at your school, or you don't even have to have taken calculus. Would we prefer it? Yes. Do we admit lots of students without it? Yes, absolutely. Because we know that your curiosity and your academic prowess can show up in other ways. It doesn't have to be in math. There are some liberal arts colleges that will really not consider you if you don't have 4 full years of a world language. And CC just doesn't have a bright line like that. You're going to have to take 2 blocks, 2 units of world language when you get to CC. But if you stop taking Spanish at Spanish 3 because in your last year of high school you want to add a different class, something that you enjoy more, that you want to explore more, that's fine with us. And that actually gives you more opportunities to show your intellectual curiosity. So I have found that our admission process is a little bit squishy. And I think that's because Matt has been here for so long and he really drives it. And that's the kind of person who he is. And I appreciate that about him because I think it helps lower the stress level for us. It helps us see the humanity in people. And I hope it helps lower the stress level for our applicants also.
Yeah. And for anybody who's listening, who's maybe listening to this or just jumping into this clip, I want to just emphasize that this is how things are done at Colorado College, not how every school is doing it. And that's part of why I wanted to talk to you, is because I think that Colorado College does some things differently. And that's part of what I think the seed that I'm trying to plant here is that colleges are different and there's such a wide range of what's out there. So just keeping that in mind. And hopefully what this provokes is, in y'all who are listening, curiosity about what else might be out there in terms of other.
I think it's really interesting to see how colleges' processes align with their values and who they are as institutions, right? Like I have thought since I was a kid, I first got interested in college admission when I was going through the process. When I was 16, I was the one out of a million kids who was like hiding under her covers at night with a flashlight reading the Fisk Guide to Colleges and the Lisa Birnbach Guide. And my parents thought I was weird as I was creating our road trips and like identifying which colleges I wanted to visit along the way. But what fascinated me about colleges is that I could see personalities associated with each college. And I think you see an aspect of that as you learn about colleges' admission processes and what they require and how they walk through the process, I think is often, probably not always, but often in line with sort of the personality of that school.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I've seen this again and again about how, well, in particular, the supplemental essays, which I wanted to talk to you about. So let's talk about that maybe a little bit. But I'd love to talk about how, what somebody can learn through CC's supplemental essay as it relates to the school's values. So maybe if you wouldn't mind just reading us the supplemental essay prompt for this year. Side note to students, parents, counselors will know this who are listening, but usually supplemental essays, which are essays written besides the personal statement / Common App / college essay, like the main one that you write. These are ones that oftentimes reveal what colleges care about. I'd love for you to just maybe read us the prompt and maybe say a little bit about, what does this reveal about the school's values?
Yeah, I do think that supplements are such a good window into schools' values. So ours has changed the last 3 years. We've had a different one every year. We're finding one to land on. So this year, here it is. One of the benefits of Colorado College's block plan is the opportunity to immerse yourself fully in a single subject for 3.5 weeks. We see this as the luxury of focus, the joy and value of directing your full attention to one thing. Tell us about a time when you experienced this kind of deep focus in an academic or extracurricular setting. What were you doing and how did it turn out? And optional, if you'd like to share the outcome, a project, performance, paper, or other result, you may upload a document or provide a URL. So in short, we're asking students to tell us about a time when they experienced deep focus. What did they do? How did it turn out? And it's because it's such a critical part of the block plan. Like, this is sort of what defines CC as an institution. We've had the block plan for 50 years, and it was created because our faculty wanted students not to miss class, because they wanted them not to say, shoot, I've got this Spanish class in the morning and econ in the afternoon. I've got to study for my econ exam, so I'm going to skip Spanish. They knew that our students were coming here because they wanted to learn. And so what's the best way to give them the opportunity to learn? Well, it's to allow them to focus on just one thing and to not have to juggle different priorities. So we are leaning into this because we know it's something that makes CC different from other colleges. And we know it's something that attracts, especially right now in this time when students are feeling overwhelmed by notifications on their phones and by really they're just having a hard time focusing, that this is something that's different. So we don't have any examples yet, right? Because this is brand new.
Right.
I wish that I actually, usually I will take our essay over the summer and like plug it into ChatGPT and see what ChatGPT would write. And this is so new that I haven't even had a chance to do that yet. But I can tell you that we really want students to feel the freedom to talk about whatever they want. It could be academic. It could be a deep dive into a hobby. It could be just something personal. I've been writing the emails to students to give them some pointers on this, and I've used a couple of examples so far. One, imagine that you foster animals for your local shelter, and they've given you this really anxious dog, and you have to sit for hours with this dog, and maybe you start 12 feet away, and then you're 10 feet away, and then you're 5 feet away, and the whole time you're talking quietly to the dog. Maybe you're even just like reading a book aloud to them in a quiet voice. And eventually you get to the place where the dog will let you pet them. And then at some point you can take a selfie with the dog. Send us the selfie. Tell us what it was like to sit there and be fully focused on this dog and their reactions to you as you moved closer and closer. What was that like to help bring a dog to a place where it was adoptable because it wasn't so scared of people anymore? Another one that I've thought of that I've been using is this experience that I had a few weeks ago. My older daughter, Bryn, was an architecture major at Wellesley, and she loves to sketch. And we were traveling together. This was like my gift to her for her birthday, was to take her to some places that had buildings that had inspired her. So we're sitting outside of this building, and she has her well-worn sketchbook, and I have one that she made me buy so that she wouldn't sit there sketching alone. And so I'm like, I'm not an artist, and I'm trying to sort of keep up with her sketching. And man, was she right when she said, you're going to get into a flow state, and you're not going to realize how quickly time is passing. Just trust me. Just put down on paper whatever you're seeing. And that feeling of deep focus where I sort of reluctantly sat down next to her and started sketching. And by the time I looked up, it was 2 hours later, the sun had gone down, I was hungry, like hundreds of people had walked by us. I lost all track of time. What's that like, to lose track of time when you're doing something, maybe something you didn't even think you could do, but you got so into it? And then the last example that I've been kind of thinking about is one of my friends from high school. His name's Dan. And I remember in high school, he had this old VW Squareback that he had bought like with his, allowance money or whatever for a few $100s. And he spent at least 2 years of high school deconstructing this old Squareback and rebuilding it. And every weekend he would just dive in, and you wouldn't see him for the whole weekend because he was so immersed in rebuilding the Squareback. And he credits that experience with where he is now. He's an orthopedic surgeon. and learning how to put things together, how to tweak things so that they fit together correctly, how to understand how systems work. That's what made him interested in orthopedic surgery. And I could totally imagine him answering this question and being able to tell us all about his square back and then upload a picture. It's beautiful. He put a new beautiful red coat of paint on it, and to be able to see the result of that. But we also don't want students to feel like there has to be some like amazing result, like your rebuilt square back, right? It could be the ugly sketch. It could be the picture of your foster dog who is still anxious but is making headway and is going to be adoptable because you've taken the time to focus.
I love this. Did you all talk about flow states specifically when you were talking about the prompt?
You know, it's so interesting. Our president, Monya Whitaker, has taught at CC for 13 years, and she is the one who started using the phrase flow state. And when she was talking to parents and students about what it's like to be on the block plan, she was using the example of flow state, and we have sort of co-opted it from her because that's how we see being in class on the block plan.
Yeah. For those who are listening who don't know about this and who are interested, there's an awesome TED Talk from years ago from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who sort of popularized this. And it's worth checking out. And there are some different qualities. He's also written a book on this, well, several books. And some of the qualities that are sort of required, according to Csikszentmihalyi, for the flow state are having a clear goal in mind. So a thing that you're trying to do, whether it's draw a building or, soothe an anxious dog, something that gives you immediate feedback on how you're doing. There's also a feeling of a balance of skills and challenge. So you're being sort of challenged enough that you're engaged, but not so much that you give up. And oftentimes there's this altered time perception that happens, whether it's, for me, it's ping pong, it's Tetris, like actual Tetris, or trying to fit things into a car that we're packing. And so the reason I'm slowing down here a little bit is for students who are thinking about this, I'm kind of trying to slow you down and thinking about what are those experiences in your life, because one, I think they can be really useful for the supplemental essay for CC, but I also think that they're just really useful to think about, one, in terms of what are those experiences that create happiness in our lives. And then two, as you're thinking about, yes, other parts of the college application and sides of yourself that you would want to show, and bringing those to the forefront and finding ways to weave those into your, let's say, your personal statement, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Now, a question that I can imagine coming up for students or parents is, but wait, what if the thing I want to do, like rebuilding an old bike or an old car, has nothing to do with my major? I'm interested in studying whatever it is. What would you say to students who are wondering that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I do feel like it's something that so many students feel like their major interest has to align with what they're doing in their free time. And at CC, it just doesn't. Our students are kind of all over the map, and that's what makes them interesting people, is they're not just doing one thing. So we know that you are likely to change your major once you get here. You don't have to declare a major until the end of your sophomore year. We also know that only about 27% of American adults with bachelor's degrees are doing work that's related to their major. I mean, Ethan, I look at you doing this job with a background in theater, and I think, frankly, that theater comes in very handy for what you're doing. And also, no one would have drawn a straight line between these two things, right?
Totally.
It doesn't really make logical sense. And yet, your background in theater makes you really good at what you do. So I think this is something that students are concerned about and something that we don't care about at all.
I love the way you said that. And I love the forthrightness that you're bringing. I also feel seen. Last weekend, I was leading a 4-day retreat for counselors, and I had a friend come along who's known me for years and years. And afterwards, after we did sort of the exercises, a lot of them related to personal growth and some personal writing. We wrote our own personal statements, and some of us shared them at the end. And at the end, my friend said to me, "You're doing theater exercises, and do they know that?" And I was like, "I think some people know that." And I was like, "Yeah, I guess these are theater exercises." And also for students, like practically speaking, if you're worried about this, I want to just point out how in the examples, for instance, that Hillary just gave, like pick a career. Like imagine that your career is, let's say, medicine, because we were talking about that. helping an anxious foster dog, talking calmly to them. Like there are qualities in there that are definitely going to serve you in the future. Sketching a building, thinking about the way things are built, the way things are structured and constructed. Also just slowing down and taking your time with a thing. Like there's so many, once you get into the values and the things that you love about a particular thing, whatever it is, if you can anchor it in the values, it's going to be so many overlaps into whatever the thing is that you're going to want to do. You don't need to make explicit connections to your major, right? But it's going to be for readers, admission readers who are used to making connections and seeing, oh, I could totally see. First of all, listen to what Hillary is saying. We don't care. But then also, if you're worried about it, there are connections to be found.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% true. I think any student, if they spend enough time thinking about the overlap between what they love doing and what they see themselves doing in the future, that they can find connections there.
That's part of what I love about this process.
Yeah.
So let's talk personal statement a little bit. Like, what advice do you give to students when it comes to writing their personal statement? Or what are some of the things that you find yourself saying a lot when it comes to writing essays?
Yeah, I tell students to lead with their story, not to stress over the prompt. I really don't think that students should spend a lot of time thinking about the prompt until they've spent a lot of time doing reflection and starting the writing process. And then if you want to take a peek at the prompts and let that help you kind of with some guidance, that's great. But when I'm reading an essay, I don't look at the prompt unless I can't understand the essay. If it's a poorly written essay, then often I will go up and scroll up to the top and look at the prompt to try to help me understand what the student might be trying to say.
And you're talking, for those who are wondering, you're talking about the Common App prompt.
Yeah,
right?
I'm talking about the Common App prompt.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
sorry. We just spent all that time on the prompt for the supplemental essay.
Just
Clearly
for those,
not talking about that one.
Yeah. So, just for those who are listening, these are the, as of this recording, 7 prompts in the Common App, and there are these options. Choice 7, by the way, is topic of your choice, but you're not even looking. You're just reading the story.
No, I'm just reading the story. Yeah. I don't, we go through applications really quickly, and every bit that you don't read saves you a little bit of time. So I don't read that part because I figure that I'm going to learn about the student from their story. And then I feel like there's this pressure on students to talk about some big thing, some big event, some lightning strike or whatever that happened in their lives. And I find small stories, everyday moments to be just as moving and interesting and enlightening as those big moments, and sometimes even more, I think, because I want to know what a student's like on a normal day of their lives, not what they were like on the best day or the worst day necessarily. I want students to write in their own voice, keep it real. The ways that you speak when you're maybe speaking in class, speaking with a teacher, chatting with your family, that voice is what I want to hear. And I think that can be really hard, especially in an era of AI. That can be tough because people are sort of all starting to sound the same in writing, but I really want to hear what you sound like. And then I think it's okay to share challenges if you want to, but I don't think that the college admission process needs to be like the stress Olympics or the challenge Olympics, right? You don't have to have overcome some huge thing in order to be admissible to even the most highly selective schools. And if you have, and if that's an authentic part of your story and you want to share it, you should share it. But you shouldn't feel like your story's not good enough because it wasn't hard enough.
Right.
And then the last thing that I'll say that I tell students a lot is, can you please use paragraphs?
Wow.
And I know that sounds so basic, but like we do get a lot of essays that are just one long paragraph. And these essays come from schools where I know that they're learning really good writing technique, but they may not be learning they may not be learning creative writing, and they may not be learning reflective writing. And so when they start writing, like kind of everything that they've learned about writing an essay goes out the window, and they just don't realize that when we're confronted by one giant block of text, it's super overwhelming. And it's just not, we have to read quickly. And so there's an element of skimming. We're not spending a few seconds on every phrase, right? And by breaking up your work into paragraphs, it's just much easier for us to read.
Somebody's going to ask me, how long-ish, and you can give a range, do you spend reading an essay? How long-ish do you spend reading an application?
Yeah, it It depends a
Does it
little bit on the
depend?
essay, right? I know. Sorry, I hate that.
No, it's fine.
I didn't
It's
mean to
the
say
first
that.
time you said it. First time you said it on the call.
Good. Yeah. An essay that really pulls me in, I might spend 2 minutes to 3 minutes on, because I'm entranced by it. I'm excited about it. I want to read every word. An essay that feels more skimmable and is leaving less of a mark, I might read more quickly than that. And how long I spend on an application really starts with what I see in the transcript. If the transcript shows me that the student is admissible or on the bubble, I'm going to spend more time on their application than one where it's got a ton of Fs, right? If you have a bunch of Fs on your transcript, it's going to be really hard for you to be admitted. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Like, I will just sort of glance at the rest of it. So that can be anywhere from 5 minutes to I will spend 15 or 20 minutes on an application when I'm really trying to dig in and identify themes across the application, make connections across the application, find what's going to be most compelling to my colleagues for when I present that application to my teammate when we're doing team rating. And then if an application makes it into the committee round, full committee, where all of us are reading the app together, sometimes I spend an hour prepping those apps, because I want to make sure I don't miss anything. I want to know every single thing that the recommenders said. I want to figure out the most compelling way to put together that student's story. And this goes back to me being the protector of my territory and the advocate, right? Like, I care about my students, and if they've made it all the way to committee, I want them to come to Colorado College. And so I'm going to spend a lot of time. That's not normal. Most people don't spend that much time prepping, but I love that part of my work.
You mentioned the word skimmable for certain essays. What signals in the first paragraph or first couple of paragraphs that you're like, oh, I can probably, this feels more skimmable? Like, what are those things that sort of put you into skimming mode? Because I know just what you're talking about. I have it myself.
Yeah. If it feels predictable, if you think that you sort of know where the essay is going based on the first paragraph, then I might skim. If the way that it's written is not very sophisticated, then I'll skim, because it's just easier. It's fast and easy to skim. More sophisticated writing, you can read quickly, but you don't have to skim it to understand what they're saying. And then I think, like, just the structure of it. If it's structured in a way that it's easy to follow, then I can skim it more easily, versus sometimes, when it's structured as a poem or in a more non-traditional kind of structure, and you have to go back and reread it a few times, that can be rough. And like, skimming is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get high marks on your essay when we review your essay. It just means that it wasn't hard for me to read. And then not skimming also is not necessarily good or bad, right? It just depends on sort of what the content is. Because you can skim it and it can be a great essay, but you didn't feel like you needed to spend a lot of time on it in order to understand it. And sometimes you can skim it because you're like, I really don't think I need to read this to understand the student.
I see how you're using skimmable now. Yeah, I was thinking skimmable in the sense of, like, the sort of quote unquote bad way. And I could see how, just structurally it could be easier to skim something that's good or bad. So let's talk about
And sometimes it's also because, like, I know I'm going to be going back and putting more time into this application later, right? And in order for it to get from that first read to the read where I'm with my partner, I don't need to dive deeply into the essay, because I can sit when we split it up and one of us is driving and the other one is the passenger. Whoever is assigned to read the essays then has more time to dive back in and look at it more closely. So, I mean, most of the applications we read go through multiple eyes, as long as the transcript is reasonable, right? And so you may not just see it in one sitting. You might skim it in the first sitting and then dive back into it more deeply the second time around.
Yeah. And part of just to let you behind the curtain in my brain, what's happening, and this is a side note to, like, students, parents, counselors listening, part of why I'm talking about this roles and identities exercise on these podcasts and in webinars and stuff is that I'm trying to make your job, Hillary, easier. Like for spending an hour trying to figure out who is this student and how do I present them, is like, if you can focus on 3 to 5 of these roles, identities, these invisible hats that you wear, and whether you name them explicitly or it's just like, oh, I can sort of get these, like you said, a theme or themes, that it makes it easier for y'all in that.
I love that.
In those
yeah, those are the things that I find myself writing in the reader notes as I'm going through, are the 3 or 4 things that I can identify about a student that is their roles or their values or the ways that they show up in a community, right? And sometimes I don't have to read deeply in order to identify those things in a student.
Yeah, that's my hope, is that the takeaway I hope for y'all who are listening is that these are being read fast, even if it is 10 minutes, that's still relatively fast given the work that y'all are putting into these. Are there ways that you can, highlight and make it clear the parts of yourself that you've been nurturing and expressing and exploring for, at least high school? So let's talk about getting started. How do you recommend students get started? Favorite brainstorming exercises, et cetera?
Yeah, I would say don't reinvent the wheel. Just really use Ethan's resources. I'm sorry, I just sound like a commercial for you, but I assume if people are here listening, then they are discovering the resources that you've already created for brainstorming and for reflecting and understanding who they are in this process. And I think that's the best way to get started. But outside of that, I would say I think it's really important to keep a notebook close or to keep your notes app kind of open on your phone. For me anyway, I have these moments when I'm in the middle of writing something where it'll unexpectedly, all of a sudden, something will come to my brain. And I'm like, oh, shoot, I hadn't thought about it that way. And then I've got to type or I've got to write. I'll be out on a long walk with my dog and I'll pull over to the side of the trail and be typing in my notes app, shoot, I've got to use these words. These are the words that I couldn't think of earlier. So I think having that close by can help move the process along, because once you come up with the right way of saying what you want to say, if you lose it from your brain, it's not coming back. So you got to write it down. And then I think it's important to be open to scrapping your work and starting over again. Not saying kill your darlings when you're writing, meaning eliminate the parts of your writing that don't serve the story. You've got to be open to that. You can't just because you spent a few hours writing a draft doesn't mean that it's the right one. And sometimes taking that draft and crumpling it up and throwing it in the trash can and starting over from scratch brings you to a new perspective, and you can weave your story together in ways that you couldn't have before. But that takes a lot of courage, right? To be able to scrap what you've already worked on. And then the other thing is I think it's important to work with a paper and pencil or paper and pen in the early stages of the process. I just am a strong believer that our brains, even students who are digital natives, the way that your body works together with your brain as you're writing, as frustrating as that might be, that using your hand and putting it on paper leads to a different outcome than if you're starting in Word on your computer or in Google Docs.
I love what you're saying, Hillary. And I had this experience over the weekend. There's something about putting a pen in my hand. We're going to sound so old.
I know. It's not nostalgic, though. I think it's true.
Hang on. I'm going to make the argument that I think something is happening, that I'm actually slowing down and I'm allowing myself to be impacted by the thought that I'm having. So rather than sort of it's whisked onto the screen and run, there's something that's happening when I'm writing the thing. I'm slowing down. I'm marinating just a little bit more. And the way that I experience it is it's almost like it's not just I'm writing the essay. It's in some ways the essay is writing me.
Yes, absolutely.
And there's a back and forth that's happening.
Yep. I think it's really hard to know what you think if you haven't written down what you think. It's hard to explore your thoughts and really understand what you're thinking without writing it down. And so I'm a huge advocate of pencil and paper or pen and paper. And there is the nostalgic part of me that likes the feel of a certain kind of pen on a certain weight of paper, on a certain thickness of notebook. And maybe that goes back to when I was a kid. But I think also just the act of writing with your hand is just different.
So this feels in a weird way, a perfect segue into talking about ChatGPT. And we talked briefly offline right before we started recording that this is something, it's a resource, it's a tool that we use. So I don't want to make this like here's why, sort of like ChatGPT is bad. We can go there, but I'd be curious to just hear you reflect a little bit about, I'm just going to offer you like an open-ended prompt, and I'm curious what you'll say. What advice would you give to students when it comes to ChatGPT and their college, let's say, application process writ large, like essay writing included?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the best way to use ChatGPT in your college application journey is to help you identify colleges that are the best fit for you, that are a place where you would be happy and you would be successful. I think it's incredibly helpful at that kind of work. And sometimes it's wrong, right? So you can't just totally rely on it. Yes, absolutely. And explore those links and double check, the work with your trusted people. But I think that the list building part of ChatGPT is probably what it's best at. I don't think that we should outsource our thinking to ChatGPT in this process. I think that there are times in work and in life when it makes sense to outsource some of your thinking to ChatGPT, but I don't think that this is one of them. I think you shortchange yourself if you're asking ChatGPT to brainstorm for you, because it just doesn't know you. And it can't do the work of brainstorming the way that you can. So I don't think that's a good use of it. I think you need to be writing it on your own, not because I have a problem with ChatGPT, but because you're going to have a better result if you write it yourself. And then once you get to the end, I think it's totally fine to very specifically write a prompt in ChatGPT, asking it to identify grammatical errors, punctuation errors, any of that kind of proofreading part. Don't let it revise. Don't let it rewrite. Mm-hmm. Don't tell it what kind of voice you want it to be in and ask it to change the voice, because I want it to sound like you. But it's okay for it to identify a place where you had two periods, or a place where you forgot to close your parentheses, or a place where your sentence structure wasn't quite right. I think those are reasonable uses.
Okay, foggy crystal ball moment. Can you imagine a future, however X years hence, where colleges just say, okay, just use ChatGPT, and everybody's using it everywhere all at once, as it were? Yeah,
I mean, there's a new course for first years at Ohio State where the purpose of the course, and all of the students are taking it, is to learn how to use AI appropriately in their work. So I think that crystal ball moment is not that far away. And I think that students who don't learn how to use AI appropriately are going to end up behind in the workforce. So I think that there are some ways. And I think that the work that institutions are doing right now is trying to figure out the nuance in that. And how do we teach our students to use it? And that's hard because it's changing faster than we can sort of get our arms around how to teach students how to use it. But I think that there are ways in which we are not going to get rid of AI-generated work. And there are ways in which, if we value our critical thinking abilities, we really have to push back against it. And I don't know how, as a 17-year-old, you have the self-control or self-discipline to push back on that the way that you need to in order to allow your brain to keep growing. But we learn what we think by writing and by being in discussions with people, and ChatGPT can't do that for you.
Yeah. I want to pivot for a couple minutes and talk about something that we haven't talked about at all yet, but I know that Colorado College tracks demonstrated interest. Mm-hmm. Some people listening to this podcast won't know what that is. So if you would be so kind as to describe just briefly what that is, and what are some great ways to demonstrate interest in the application process?
Yeah. So demonstrated interest can mean slightly different things to different colleges, but generally it is when there is a record of your engagement with the college through the Office of Admission. So that can be attending a virtual information session, a virtual small group chat. It can be showing up on campus for an open house or for an info session and campus tour. It can be going to the high school visit when counselors like me come to visit your high school and sit and chat with students. When you show up, we take roll. And so all of those opportunities for formal engagement, they appear on the dashboard of your application when I'm reading your application. You don't see it, but I see it along with all of your demographic information. Any way that we have seen you formally engage with us will show up there. And I think that the idea of that, I mean, there are a couple different ways to think about this. Like, colleges are trying to predict yield. We're trying to predict how many students are going to come to our school once they're admitted. And demonstrated interest is supposedly one way that we can track that. It can help us identify which students are most likely to enroll. And some would say that then you're going to be more likely to admit the student who is likely to enroll. That is different. There's different philosophy on that at all different colleges. But the other side of it is that by getting you to formally engage with us, we have an element of control over what you're learning. And so you actually learn how the block plan works rather than hearing about it from your neighbor whose cousin's daughter went to CC, right? Like that is something like I don't want you to apply here early decision without understanding how the block plan works, because I want to know that you are going to be happy here and that you know what you're getting into when you come here, right? Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that lots of colleges want students to understand their values or how their school works or what matters to them, and they want to be able to control some of that learning. And so we want you to engage with us so that you can hear it straight from us rather than hearing it, through multiple people. And then there are other ways of engaging that are less tracked or less formal. So when you hear from your friend's mom's, cousin or whatever about CC, like, yes, you're going to learn something about CC and that's awesome. And also, I don't know that you've learned that thing because I can't see it in my database. So it's great for you figuring out whether CC might be a good fit for you, but it's not great for me knowing that you know that CC is going to be a good fit for you. Same thing, like if you show up on campus because you're on vacation in Colorado Springs and you're here on a Saturday and we don't have tours most Saturdays, and you show up and you wander around yourself. Okay, so you've gotten a feel for our campus. Maybe you visited downtown Colorado Springs, got to eat in one of our awesome restaurants. That's great, but you haven't really gotten sort of the inside information. So you know a little bit, but I don't have a way to track that. And I don't know that you really know what you need to know in order to make a decision about coming to CC. So there are a few different perspectives on demonstrated interest. Some colleges will ask you to check a bunch of boxes in the application of here are all the ways that I engaged with your college. And sometimes it is like I talked to a friend who goes to your college and you can check that box. At CC, when we're reading an application, if you have had any kind of formal engagement with us, we check a box that says that you formally engaged with us, and that's it. It adds, we're scoring all the different parts of your application and adds a very minimal, additional couple of numbers or something. I don't even know what the total score possible is, but it adds a little bit to your application. But mostly it's all right, this student, we really like this student, but do they actually know anything about CC and how serious are they about coming here? And that matters most in our most selective round, our regular action round.
Side note to anyone listening, we've got a whole separate podcast and guide on demonstrated interest for anybody who's interested, and we'll link to it in the show notes. And I want to also point out that this, you talking about using ChatGPT and the research process, I think is such a great idea. I mean, it's going to save you some time. I don't think it replaces necessarily counselors, because I think somebody who's really knows their stuff and who's visited a campus and walked the halls, as it were, and eaten at the dining halls. There are counselors with lots of experience that have, encyclopedic knowledge. And I don't think this replaces that. But when you're trying to figure out, hey, are there other schools that are, as you were saying earlier, Hillary, that are sort of peer institutions? What are schools that are like that? If you can't reach your counselor, or if you don't have a counselor, yes, I think ChatGPT can be useful. And make sure that you ask it for links. You can go check this out on your own. And we're going to be updating our guide to researching colleges. And as soon as it's updated, it'll be in the show notes. Hillary, as we wrap here, I'd love to know I'd love for you to just speak directly to students for a minute. What do you hope that they'll keep in mind as they go through this process?
Yeah, that's such a great question because it can be such a stressful process. I like to remind students that there are somewhere around 3,000 colleges in the US that they get to choose between. And most of them they're going to be admitted to, like the vast majority. And most of them are awesome places with great communities and great resources that are going to launch them into a great career. And I hope that that helps take some of, like, if you can go into this process with that mindset that, like, there are a lot of amazing places out there that I can be admitted to, that should make this a less stressful process, I hope. And then I think the other part of it is, like, I don't know if this is true, the Socrates quote that says the unexamined life is not worth living. I don't know if that's true. Not a philosopher. But I think that there's at least some truth in it, in this process, right? That self-reflection, that thinking about your values, how you became who you are, how what you care about overlaps with the different colleges on your list and what they care about. Thinking about these things spurs growth. And as a 16 or 17 or 18-year-old, you're at a time in your life where your life is all about growth. And the college journey is such a perfect opportunity to engage in that kind of self-reflection and growth. And so let it be that for you.
What would you say to parents?
This is what I tell parents. You need to make it easy for your kids to make you proud. And so that means being excited about their list, every college on their list, not just the ones that have the lowest admit rate. It means letting your kids sort of lead the way through this process and cheering them on. It means your face lighting up whenever you see them. This is such a hard process for kids, and I think as parents, we can make it easier by setting a low bar for what's going to make us proud as our kids walk through the process.
I love that so much. We'll end there. Thanks, Hillary, so much.
Thank you, Ethan. So good to talk with you.
Thanks, friends, as ever, for listening. You'll find the show notes at collegeessayguide.com/podcast. And hey, the best place to find out about everything that's coming up in CEG land, that's College Essay Guy land, to find out about our latest resources, live events, and so much more, is to just opt into our newsletter on our homepage, collegeessayguy.com, or to basically any of the other opt-ins on the site, and we'll add you to the newsletter. Be well and stay curious.